What's up, guys? In this episode, we sit down with Flowmark and Caribou Services to talk about equipment for pros. And since it's the hottest topic right now, we're going to talk about tariffs and how they affect the portable sanitation industry. Let's jump in. So let's start with the basics. Scott, can you tell us, what are the different types and kinds of portable restroom rental trucks, and just kind of go over that, from start to growing a fleet?
Sure. So basically, there's several different designs that we do on a standard basis. Starting with the smallest is a 999. That's a 699 waste and a 300 fresh. The second size up is going to be a 1275, which is a 900 waste, 375 freshwater. And then the next size up is a 1500, 1100, 400 on that one. And then a 2,000 gallon, which is a 1,500 and a 500. We do some pickup and delivery units as well, which will have the tank behind the cab, which is an 800 gallon tank, and then a flatbed for toilets. Generally that tank size is pretty standard. We do smaller versions and then we do larger versions based off longer beds. In between all those different sizes, we do a lot of custom tank sizes. So if a customer requests a different split or a certain size, based off of just needs that they want, or maybe requirements in their area, we'll do that as well. There's really not something we won't do, depending on, as long as we can build it. We do have a few customers who do emergency response that very rarely will do a much larger size tank with a portable toilet type setup, which can go up to a 4,000 gallon tank, obviously on a significantly larger truck. We do offer a unique product line, which is a combination tank, which is going to look like a portable toilet tank, but also have the septic inlet and rear manway on the back of the tank. So a million different configurations of how people want things done, or how they would like it. And I think being able to have that ability to customize that tank how you want is key. I think some builders might stick to just a cookie cutter tank where this is all they offer, but we have state-of-the-art engineering that allows us to do many different styles. So
what is the most common size that you sell of truck?
I would say the two most common are probably the 1275, which is going to go on your standard Ram 5500, your F550. We do some CVs that are similar to the Chevy 5500s. That's probably the most common size. Although as the years change and businesses change, it seems that the 2,000 gallons are very popular right now. That's going to be, just under CDL. It's going to be on several different, any kind of chassis that builds a under 26,000 GVW chassis. So I think those are our two common ones. I think on the West Coast, we do see a lot of the 999s to standard tanker endorsements, which can be all over the country depending on your states. Because there are a lot of different requirements in every state that is different based off tanker endorsements, what actually is a CDL truck, what isn't. You can go on Facebook and see the million of discussions about that every day. But I think that the 1275 and the 2000s are our most common for sure.
Chris, let's talk toilets. Give us if you're just starting out, what are the different types of toilets for this industry?
So you have multiple brands obviously out there to pick from, whatever suits your fancy. So you have your regular static type unit, which is your basic portable toilet. Then you also have your handicap, or your, not technically ADA, but what the industry calls as a handicap, and then an ADA sized units. Then you step into your specialty stuff, you know, that has a foot pedal flush or a hand flush, your inside hand sink, you know, some of the more luxury type options, let's say. Then obviously you step up into restroom trailers. You know, the pod units I see are starting to become fairly popular. Seeing a lot of that stuff in the other markets, like the overseas markets, that kind of thing. So, and then another thing that we are seeing, especially in Michigan right now with this major ice storm we just absorbed here a couple weeks ago, we're seeing a lot of the pod type unit or the trailer type unit that are bunk houses in the lineman camp and so forth. Up in Gaylord here north of us, they brought in all those portable facilities. So a pretty good vast array of different items to suit any market.
What about for someone that is starting out and they want to have the most versatile truck and tank and toilets? I'll start on the truck side. Scott, like, what's the most versatile truck that someone should get started with?
You know, I think just starting out, depending on, you know, if we're dealing with a situation where the company's being started fresh from the ground, you know, I think there is an important factor to, you know, maybe start with a slide-in tank, start building your routes, start building your customer base, and naturally growing that before you jump into equipment, like big equipment. You know, as a truck builder, you know, we're going to say, oh, you should buy nothing but new. That's the only way to go. And in a lot of cases, that's true, to not sink money into used equipment, right? There's nothing worse than having equipment that's down. You can't make money. You're putting a ton of money into repairs and parts. But a new truck and a loan payment's scary. Like, you need to make sure you've got the income to cover that with what you're doing. So I think naturally progressing through the slide into a small toilet truck to starting to build a fleet is important. And as you grow, trying to find a company to partner with, several companies to partner with on toilet service, route stuff, on trucks, all those things are very important because they'll kind of help you. And I feel like this industry is very eager to help each other all across the board. Everyone wants to see everyone succeed. So I think really getting into a position where you can buy new trucks and you can have a standardized fleet and really start to grow that business efficiently without overextending yourself or buying junk that is going to do nothing but break down. Slide-ins are a pretty good place to start.
On the toilet side, Chris, if you're starting out, I would guess that most pros, you're going to be renting to construction sites and whatnot as the bread and butter of your business. What's a good mix of toilets to start out with?
I started my very first original company with 2 old used fiberglass units. This day and age, however, nobody really wants to see those anymore. So if you are looking at it from a financial standpoint, hopefully you have done your market research. You know what your competition is. You got a pretty decent handle on what your profit margin is. So if you are gearing towards the construction side of the market, you have to ask yourself, am I in a large populated area where, say, okay, they're going to build a huge shopping complex or whatever. It's going to be a union type job. So if I'm going to be looking at that, I'm going to probably be looking towards some used units that I don't have to pay a lot of money for, because I know by the end of the job, I'm probably going to throw a bunch of those away. And so if you're new looking to get into this market, hopefully you're talking to other pros, you're doing your research to find out that when it comes to a union type job, you're going to want something that is quote unquote disposable. So you're going to be looking at some of that. But at the end of the day, the toilet industry has drastically changed in my lifetime. It is a customer service show type industry. So you're going to really want to step up and buy some nicer equipment. Now, is it really feasibly cost wise to step out and buy some really nice high end used units? Maybe, if you walk into the right deal, versus buying new. But you're going to need a mix of that. And, I guess it all depends on what kind of structure you're looking at to get started with, financial wise, as to what you would, look at. But you don't want to probably realistically ever just go, hey, I'm going to start this unit or this company with these used units, and that's where I'm going to go. You're going to find out real quick, you're going to go backwards.
And no one wants to go backwards. So let's avoid that mishap. On the, still sticking with the folks that are more getting started, Scott, what about financing options for someone that, hey, they're just starting this business out, they're buying some toilets and they need that slide-in unit or whatnot. What does Flowmark do as far as financing options for folks?
So we have just started, we're actually producing slide-in tanks now. That was something we haven't done just because production or schedule, it just didn't allow us to get into that product line. So we are actually doing those now. One thing we do for a lot of our customers is when we are talking about a truck or equipment, we're talking about who are you partnered with in lending? Do you have a relationship with a bank? Things like that. For just starting out, that's a little trickier because you need time in business. Will the person personally guarantee the loan? Things like that. We have an in-house financing department that deals with all different types of credit, new customers. We have a couple partnered lenders that specialize in new business and really allow us to offer a raiment of products of financing and leasing. We have a specific person that deals with that here. She's great to deal with and makes it really easy in seeing what's out there. And then, we also encourage people to check with your local banks, who you have your relationship with. If you banked with a bank personally for 10 years and you're starting your business, open your business bank account there. Those are all relationships that mean something. And generally equipment financing companies have a little bit better rates because they understand the product better than at the traditional banks. But that doesn't mean you can't get a great rate through your local bank and find an option somewhere. There are also even ones that, they're a little more intense to deal with. They're higher interest rates, a lot of money down. But those are sometimes sacrifices, to really get to that next step with new equipment or a couple of units at one time based off a contract or something like that. We saw a lot of that during COVID, where people were had the opportunity for massive contracts, but they knew they couldn't fulfill the contracts without the equipment to do it. So those were things where at the time banks and, kind of like where we're in now, where money's expensive to borrow and, they've kind of pushed back on credit requirements. But we partner with many different lenders that can usually take care of everybody in one way or another.
So Chris, you mentioned some of the pitfalls being, if someone's starting out, they're going with used equipment. And since you mentioned that you're 100 years old and started out with fiberglass units, could you share with the audience some of the common mistakes that pros make when starting out as it pertains to choosing their equipment?
So I have seen over the years companies come and go. I've seen some that just step out. Hey, I'm gonna grab this thing by the horns. I'm gonna set this world afire, and that's the way it's gonna be. So they've stepped out, bought a lot of or almost brand new equipment, and then they find out that, oh man, portable toilets are not a get rich quick scheme. I've seen it time and time again, and then there's guys that are just sitting there waiting to pick that almost brand new equipment up from them for pennies on the dollar. So they're left holding the bag on what they spent versus where they're going. So you can go backwards that way really quick. The other thing I've seen is people not doing market research, buying a competitor or another company looking to get into this. Hey, this is just what I want to do, and this guy's for sale. So they step out, they buy this company, acquire all these assets, and don't really understand the business and what they're buying completely. And they buy a whole bunch of very old equipment that's wore out, outdated, hard to get parts for, etc. And so now all of a sudden, hey, the business is thriving and it's growing, and we need some new equipment. And man, my truck's always broke down, and where do I go rent a truck from? How can I get this done? I gotta call and rely on a competitor or beg to rent one of their trucks or something. So now they have a lot full of old used equipment sitting there that they've paid a lot of money for, or they're still paying for, and they have put themselves basically out there and not given them, financially the opportunity to grow because of what they invested in. I've seen both of those scenarios very much. The biggest thing, I'll say it time and time again, is you've got to do your market research to know what is the best option. And like with Scott, they're offering slide-in units now. I used to look at some of these operators and go, why would you invest in a slide-in unit if you're running this truck yourself and you're servicing 200 toilets a week? That's what my company has, is 200 toilets, and I got to service them, so many of them a day. Why would you invest into that? The proper business model, it can be a great thing. I actually visited a lady owned and ran company last year, and she uses strictly all slide-in units. For my size company of slide-in units, okay, I mean, I'd take that if I had one tip over, 40 miles away or something. But for her, she could buy a very nice sized slide-in unit. And if something happened to one of her trucks, she had the ability to quick unbolt that, swap it over to another truck, and go right back to work. So we don't always think about how viable some of these things are and how things have changed. I know Scott could tell you, how much the truck world has changed in the last 5 years from what it was. So it all comes back to do your market research, figure out what you're targeting and where is your money best spent. Yeah. Are there some good, viable options used? Absolutely. There sure is. But you have to make sure that it's right for you or your company and your business plan. Or do you step out and you buy new? Scott had just talked about financing. I dealt with a company just a while back that had gotten started just a few years ago. They couldn't afford to buy a complete off the, rail brand new pump truck ready to go. But what they could do is obtain financing from, say, for a Ram or a Ford or whatever they chose. And then they were able to get their hands on a slide-in unit, and it was affordable for them. So they were able to get started that way. Even though it's not something that I would do in our company, but that was what they could afford, and that suited their business plan. So there's many options out there, many different things. But your research will tell you exactly what kind of options you should be looking at for your business.
Well said. I think the key takeaway there is a solid business plan, because if you know that you're going to go after construction and events, well, then you should align, your business plan and equipment towards that. If you know you're going to go after something else, then it would be different. But I think that's really well said, Chris. So switching gears a little bit here and moving on to, someone that maybe they went through the slide in and now they've outgrown them. Their business is starting to pick up. Their business plan said, okay, we're gonna get this much business before we go somewhere else and buy some bigger units. But Scott, like what should these operators keep in mind when transitioning from something like a slide in to stepping up to something like a pump truck?
I definitely think diving into one thing I'll do with my customers, if it's a new customer or if it's a early on customer, is we'll dive into your business, right? How many toilets do you have? How many toilets are you servicing? What's your standard routes like? How many drivers do you have? We'll go deep into that and figure out what the best option is for you. I think when you're transitioning from a slide in, like Chris was talking about, it's always smart to have that extra truck, right? Have that backup truck. One thing we started building roll-offs in the fall, and we designed, which we debuted the septic version at the wet show, but we're also doing a portable toilet roll-off. So really what that's designed is to go between the roll-off business and the toilet business, so you have an in-between truck, or you can be able to do both. And I think, kind of getting back to what you had asked, it's really just coming up with how you're seeing how you're going to grow. What are you going to get into roll-offs? Are you going to go into septic? What are you going to continue to do or grow to see what type of truck really is the best bet? Because if you're coming from a slide in and you're telling me, oh, I'm going to grow rapidly, I've got contracts that are going to happen, I'm going to do some septic stuff too, like maybe grease. I mean, maybe we'll get into all that stuff. Then it's probably not smart to talk to that person about another smaller truck. You're probably wanting to go into like a 1,500 or 2,000 gallon, where you're still under CDL in most states, and really just kind of figure out what their plans are. I think naturally the progression is keep going sizes up, right? 1275, into do you need a pickup and delivery unit? Do you want to be able to service this and drop, carry 6 toilets? We build a pickup and delivery unit that we can do a 20-foot bed on it. Now that's a big truck. So really it's hard, especially in today's world, it's hard where you can hop on social media, see 100 different products, and then your mind starts going crazy. And it's like, oh, maybe I need this truck. Maybe I need this truck. And then you get away from what the plan is or how you think you should build the business. And with all the Facebook groups for our industry, and the great relationships that other people have at the shows and everything else, you get to kind of experience all of that with them and see how they grow and what's worked and what hasn't worked. So I think really we just dive into their business and see what their growth plan is, and see if, ultimately, what is your game plan? Do you want to grow this business and pass it down to generations, or are you building a fleet to sell this company to a bigger box company? And when you're looking at those things, are we doing custom trucks? Are we doing standard trucks? Like we know in our industry that what those big box retailers look for if you're trying to build your business to sell. Now, if you want custom stuff, your end user driving the truck, you put a little more effort into it. You get some customization stuff, you get some things you would need or you like on a truck. And I think the key is knowing your path before you start, because if there are many people who get started and then they just go in 100 different directions, and that's generally when things start to kind of go a little crazy and trying to get back to what the path is and what they're looking to do, for sure.
Let's talk fleet maintenance. And Chris, I know you guys have had an arc of when you're smaller to when you're growing to the size you are today, of how you've approached it. Can you give us that arc? Like, what was fleet maintenance like in the beginning and what's it like now?
Yeah, fleet maintenance. The guy that drove the truck was the guy that changed the oil and the flat tires. So it's like I said, this industry has changed so drastic, so fast. A lot of operators are still mom and pops. in this industry. So a lot of them have the capabilities of doing a lot of stuff themselves. Other ones, no, they take everything into a shop. And so for us, we're, 50, 200-ish toilets, give or take. So our southern locations, we actually have a contract with an outside company that sends a mechanic to each location, a day a week or whatever. Now my stuff up here in the north, I have a very good relationship with a very reputable shop just 6-7 miles from here. So we bring our stuff to them. And what I have found to be very cost effective, economical for us in doing this, and we have grown this quite drastically and it's worked very well, was when I approached them, I said, look, I will bring you 100% of my work, but in return, when I have something that comes in that I really need, I need some priority over some of these other people. So that means, okay, today I need a service on this truck and it might cost me $435 to have them service a truck. Okay, well, maybe Joe's repair over here, he would have done it for $285. But the deal is I bring him 100% of my work. I'm not going to take my gravy work to the guy down the road because he's $150 cheaper, because tomorrow I might really need that truck and that $150 isn't going to save me. It's going to cost me way more because I didn't take him my gravy work and now I need him to do my crap work. So we've fostered that relationship there. The same, this particular shop has 4 guys, the same 4 guys, they know our equipment, they know what we do. So for me, it's a simple shoot them a text, make a quick phone call. Hey, this truck's coming in on the hook. Hey, one of the guys is dropping this off, whatever it may be. And, I need this. This one's hot, the guys in the South, they have the same mechanic shows up, does their PMs, does their, that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of different options. I mean, there's companies out there that, yes, they have their own, mechanics in their own shop and stuff like that. But honestly, for my thought process, the more these new trucks are coming, the more specialized the components to these trucks are, the harder it's going to be to employ and be cost effective and efficient to have an in-shop mechanic for this new equipment. The proprietary software, that kind of stuff. It's going to be very tough to have your, on the floor guy be able to do stuff other than your normal oil changes and, your PMs and so forth. So for me, it was, hey, form this relationship, make it tight, make it strong, and make it flow. And it works very, very well. Our southern guys, yep, they come right to the yard. They have a little bigger facility there. So he has a bay where he can do all that stuff. And there again, if it's something major, then they wind up taking it back to their shop, or, or we have it towed there, whatever. So essentially you still have to consider having a spare truck sitting there for when that happens, or, the newer trucks, if you got to take it to a dealership, you guys better have a very, very tight relationship with your dealership and your sales rep, because it's going to be a tough ride for some of you. I've learned that firsthand. And Scott, you can scold me for this, and no offense, but the days for me to step and just call Scott and say, hey, Scott, I need this, this F600, here's the specs. That don't work for me, because I had a truck with that. We relied on it quite heavily, and we took it in to the dealer for service because it was warranty. Well, about the third or fourth day it sat there and they never even bothered to look at it yet. Well, you're just on the list. You didn't buy the truck from us, so boy, that sure got me hard. So I buy my cabin chassis local, and then if I wanted Flowmark to build a tank for me, I'd spec that out and send them my cabin chassis, because when Chris has a problem, the dealer is going to take care of me because I've formed that relationship with them. They're going to do what they need to do to keep me happy because they want to sell me 2 more trucks again next year. So, the software that's out there with maintenance programs, it's there's so many different options, so many different avenues. But it really depends on how your business is structured, and what, you're looking to accomplish there. And obviously, if you take somebody that does dumpsters and toilets and septic and stuff, maybe they're big enough that they will have a full-time mechanic, and only send out what they can. And that might be the most profitable and economical for them. But this is what we found that works for us. And we've really pushed to keep them relationships very tight, and stable. And it's worked very well for us.
Thanks for sharing your perspective, Chris. Scott, what's your perspective on that? I'm sure, Flowmark has a stance on how they work with their customers as far as it comes to maintenance and warranties, all that good stuff.
We have grown exponentially in the last 3 years, I would say. Really, in the last 2 years, we moved into a new facility, really have expanded what we do. So, always customer service is the most important at the end of the day, right? The building the relationships, the person that's going to take care of you from start to finish, in between, whatever happens. So generally what we'll do is, you have your salesman that you deal with. They'll be your point of contact and really be the person you develop the relationship with. I deal with people that, I've sold trucks to for 7 years that, I get invited to their kids' birthdays and on couples trips and stuff like that, because we've built those relationships. And they know that if they need something from Massport, I'll be the one that calls John Gilbert and yells at him and, for them. Or what I'll do is, if it's a dealer issue, yes, there's limited situation, things that happen where I'm calling the dealership and I'm not even getting a hold of anybody because it's at a dealership in California that I've never dealt with. So what Chris was talking about was establishing a relationship with your local dealer. That is a great idea, because when the trucks go down, we have to deal with them and we have to help them figure out those problems. And a lot of times they are not cooperative. Our dealer who we get our chassis from are all very good. But again, it goes back to they have limited power on what they can do with the chassis brand, right? Whether it's International, Ford, Ram, they all are only just calling from where they are to that location. So definitely establishing those relationships and leaning on vendors for everything, whether it's pumps, toilets, trucks, dealerships, wherever you get anything from. And really that kind of goes back into our last topic, where as customers are growing, establishing those relationships are very important in all avenues, because ultimately, like Chris said, when you've got to lean on someone because you need something done that maybe extra or over the top, they're there for you because you have that relationship. And this industry is great with that. It really is. I mean, a lot of these people consider themselves, families in ways, even though they're competitors, which is crazy, because it's not like, they're not willing to, they'd rather have a handshake deal than, something else, right? Because the word means more than a piece of paper. But it's a great industry to be in, and I think that the relationships is key for making everything successful, whether it's your business, their business, our business. It's just the main point there for sure. So
love that. Chris, you and I have talked about this before, but it'd be great to share with the audience. How long, everyone's going to do this different, by the way, but how long do you guys keep your trucks? Is it hours, miles, combination?
Right now, pretty much we run them until it's too costly to keep them going. We've started on the program of spending a little more money up front when I build or buy a tank body. You know, I may choose to spend the extra 10 grand and go to a stainless or aluminum, or just depends on what the need is for that truck. So I may step up, spend that extra money today, and then be able to switch that to another chassis. So I can utilize that same tank body maybe for 2 or 3 chassis. So if I gave Scott an extra 10 grand for that stainless body, well, if I can put that on 3 chassis before it's pretty much toast, well, then it's only cost me $3,000, for each chassis compared to, doing that. Ideally, in a perfect world, man, I'd love to run a truck to say 150,000 and dump it and just, have somebody drop me off another brand new one. But unfortunately, it don't really work that way for a lot of companies. Maybe if you had somebody that was structured correctly to lease them, then that might be a good thing. But I think we're probably a little more fortunate than a lot because of the way we're structured and set up. We're able to purchase new trucks, cabin chassis, and do a lot of the work in-house, so it doesn't cost us as much to keep stuff going. But you're going to have the people on the other end of the spectrum. They're going to run that thing till they can't run it no more, or maybe they're not profitable enough to consider buying something newer or new. So they don't really have a choice. And, then we see others that it's, they run them certain miles and they dump them, or certain years, that kind of a thing. But what we found at our size of a company is this is what works good for us. And this is what's, makes sense on paper when we run the numbers. So that's what we try to do. But then again, it depends on the use of that truck too. Like, what is that truck mainly used for? Because I can take a truck that is primarily ran, say, in the produce sector or in the military base, and that truck is not going to give me the same service life as, say, a normal route truck that's out there running, a mixture of a heavily condensed city route, maybe, and stretching its legs a little bit and running some country stuff where I have some time in between stops, just because it's not going to get the abuse that those other vehicles are. So you have to consider, what the usage is at the end of the day for where we go with it.
I've never heard people talk about the life of their toilets, and obviously it's dependent on, if you're doing a bunch of construction or events, and you're gonna have a different mix, but what's your general philosophy, Chris, about the life of a toilet?
The life of a toilet, that is going to be very dependent on your service area, and your clientele. Us personally, we try to run them until they start showing a little bit of age in our special events, and then they're rolled over into construction. Now, we do have one southern area where we actually choose to use new toilets in construction. So you take toilets that are produced and used in southern states, their toilets are not going to have the lifespan that us northerners are going to get, for the simple fact of they deal with that extreme heat and sunlight, and plastic and sunlight are not friends. So their longevity is not going to be what ours is. So we have basically the philosophy of, if that unit's good, we can find a home for it. And then we kind of can pick and choose, once it leaves our quote unquote special event or, higher end rentals type stuff. Then we choose, what kind of shape is it in? Is it suitable for military? Is it suitable for the homeless camps? Is it suitable for things of that nature? And that's where we send that to. So, but for the most part, it's like anything. You want to utilize it as long as you can and get your ROI on it.
So we're recording this episode in April of 2025, and you can't turn on any news channel without hearing the word tariff. And so let's dive into that a bit. Scott, given the current tariffs and potential tariffs in the future, how could changes in steel and material pricing affect the cost of purchasing trucks?
So I think that it can extremely affect it. First ones to jump on the phone calls were chassis suppliers. Here's what we're looking at. You've got Ford, Ram, Canada, Mexico, other company, International, Kenworth, Peterbilt. They've all got parts coming from all different places, right? So those conversations were had first. That there's charges coming from the supply, from the chassis suppliers that are being relayed to us of what ifs. Is this going to happen? Here's kind of a layout of what we're going to do. And also it could go up again in June. It could go up again in September or the end of the year. I think a lot of people are being a lot more cautious up front because of what happened with COVID, where everyone was left scrambling after the fact. So I think some are jumping the gun a little too early on it when it comes to the chassis suppliers. But the fees are real. They've been adding them to build sheets for quotes to be built in the summer and letting us know that could go up again in June with new tariffs. As for steel and raw materials and things like that, we source most of our stuff in the USA, so we really have the impact's been pretty minimal on that end. We're not passing anything down to customers at this time because there's really nothing that we're affected by. If we're quoting out trucks where there may be one involved, we'll state that up front. But I think it's definitely a real thing, and it could possibly get out of hand depending on what suppliers decide to do from now till the end of the year, and what tariffs will really happen and how long this will go on. But it is definitely conversations that have been had with every supplier that we deal with, whether it's chassis, parts, pumps, water pumps, everything. But at this point, most of our stuff is sourced in America, and if any increase has been had, which some stuff there has been, it's been minimal, and we haven't let that trickle down to the customer at this point.
That's great. If it does get to the point where prices go up, do you see that forcing more people into the used market?
I don't think so. It's hard to say. I feel like during COVID, used equipment's value soared, mostly because it was hard to get a new truck. Build schedules were out far, orders were piling up, there were shortages, there were surcharges, all things like that. So I think used equipment became more valuable. Which good used equipment is valuable. It is, but you don't know what you're buying. So that's part of that issue. I think a lot of times, lead time is what leads people, I feel like, into used equipment. And again, money's expensive to borrow, depending on interest rates, credit requirements. I think probably last year, last year and a half ago, rates were super low, right? So that's pushing people to buy new equipment. I mean, if you can buy new equipment with practically house money, it's a no-brainer. But now you're talking about rates that are up in the 7/8s, maybe higher depending on situation. I think that there'll always be a market for used equipment. Also, new equipment prices have steadied out. They haven't gone up drastically like they have in the last 3 years. Now, of course, the tariffs are coming, so we'll see what happens there. But I really don't think it makes a giant impact on that. I think it's really the biggest increases was after COVID, and I think people kind of got used to that with everything, adjusted their rates, adjusted how much they charged. Because at that time it was such a shock of what was happening because we couldn't get a grasp on what the increases were. They just kept going up, and I could quote a truck and literally 5 days later the quote would be invalid because it was like we couldn't get anybody to commit to say, hey, this is good for a week, maybe 2 weeks. And where, in a normal world, I quote a truck, it's good. That quote's good for 30 days. Where during COVID, it was just out of control. And we put a flat rate surcharge down that allowed us to deduct from that surcharge. So it won't go over this, but we're going to get it lower than this. And that was kind of a good way to put it up front to protect everyone involved. But I don't see that happening in this situation. I think it's all going to be pretty straightforward, and if it continues to escalate. But I think that the used equipment will stay the same. I think it'll be the same. I don't really see it affecting that at this point.
Some great points there. Chris, from the operator's perspective, have you guys felt anything yet from the tariffs?
No, nothing, that we've dealt with. I mean, I just did toilet paper contracts, hand sanitizer contracts. There's always the what if clause in there, but as far as anything like that, no, I have not really come across anything major there that we've been, had an add-on to it as of now. So.
Well, that's great. I hope it stays that way for all of us. But I think this is a good place to land this plane. So, gentlemen, thank you so much for being in this episode, and we'll see you on the next one.